Have you ever been hurt by another person? Have you ever been upset to the point where you couldn't forgive them even though you tried? Many of us have read the words of Jesus, you must forgive others, and yet we find it difficult to put into practice. Today we're talking about forgiveness on this life.
Five facts about forgiveness. You can choose to forgive someone who has wronged you, even if they do not deserve or ask for forgiveness.
Well, you say that so cheerfully. That's difficult.
It absolutely is. Forgiveness is not the same thing as reconciliation.
No, now that's true.
That is very true. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness can be viewed in three dimensions: relational, spiritual, and personal. And the last one, research has shown that learning to practice forgiveness can help some to reduce high blood pressure. Carla, you seem very...
I know some people we need to send to that program.
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, here's a scenario about forgiveness, and this, I think every single one of us struggles with this. Speaking
not
for
me.
myself,
No.
yes. Janice tells you that her sister Beth wants to take her to a family reunion next month. Janice explains, my grandmother will be there and she used to beat me with a shoe for no reason every time she babysat us.
With a shoe?
With a shoe. She used to tell me that if anyone asked about the bruises on my legs, to tell them that I fell down the stairs.
She's serious.
She was serious. I was never able to forgive her. Beth read to me from the Bible that if we don't forgive people, God won't forgive us. So now I'm thinking that since I'm an adult, I just need to get over it and move on and go spend time with her. I'll tell her that I forgive her and maybe we can pick up again where life was before she started beating me all the time.
Wow.
Well, first,
Where do I get these, right?
Oh my goodness.
First, she didn't quote it. We need to look at that quote. She said that it says, if we don't forgive others, God won't forgive us. Which is a...
So what does the Bible verse say?
Well,
forgive us our debts as we forgive
there,
those.
forgive us our wrongs that we've done as we forgive the wrongs others have done to us.
So it doesn't say
So
that.
she
doesn't
might
say-
misunderstand something
right.
that the Bible
Yeah.
says.
Yeah.
Because that would be a horrible thing to think.
We're all doomed if we,
We're all doomed,
because we
yeah.
can't forgive the way Jesus
That's
forgives.
At least not without his,
Without His grace
the power
and
of
power.
God's grace.
Absolutely.
But still, she's afraid that she has to forgive her grandmother.
Well, she has a real sense of urgency about
Sure.
this. I've got to do this. Got to forgive. And abuse, that's really tough. Have you ever had anyone who's been abused say, I've got to forgive, otherwise I'm just not a Christian?
Well, you know, the forgiveness, I read in the book Forgive to Live, that forgiveness is more for the person who, it's not necessarily for the person who's forgiven as much as it's beneficial to the person who actually gives the forgiveness and offers the forgiveness. Because, her grandmother might say, I don't need you to forgive me. So offering that forgiveness to the grandmother is, I think, more for Beth. Is that her name, right? It's more for Beth than it is so much so for the grandmother in this situation, because she's the one that's going through not only the emotional, dealing with the abuse that happened, because I know she's wondering, well, why? What did that ever do? No one deserves to be hit with a shoe and then to be told to lie, about why you have these bruises. I mean, that in and of itself is very damaging. And then this idea is that this is my grandmother, I should love her, I should forgive her.
obey her.
I should obey her,
Yeah.
She needs some healing. This forgiveness is really about Beth and not about her grandmother. And I don't even think she
You mean
realizes, Janice, I'm sorry, it's more for Janice than it is for the grandmother. I don't even think she's aware.
But what is forgiveness? I think sometimes we think forgiveness is saying to someone, it's okay that you did it. That's not what forgiveness is. What is it that Janice needs to do with her grandmother?
Well, we have a definition here of forgiveness. I'm not sure where this came from, but this is a great, if we have, see our slide here, of what forgiveness is. It's giving up my right to hurt you for hurting me.
Yes.
So it's giving up the right for revenge, giving up the right to carry a grudge. That seems humanly acceptable to do.
It does, and it definitely doesn't mean that you forget what has been done to you. Because so often we've heard this saying, oh, just forgive and forget. You know, don't even worry about it, don't even think about it anymore. But forgetting is not the answer to forgiving.
No, if she forgot that her grandmother was that vicious to her and she went right back to her, she could keep hurting her.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And she would also train herself to forget other people's behavior when they hurt her.
Well, and the other thing, I think some people think that forgiving means you don't let that other person know that they hurt you. One of the things about forgiving, I think, is to let a person know what they are being forgiven for.
Good point.
So, you know, if we could just do a little role play. You want to be grandma?
Yes, I'll be oh, yes. I did think
And
about
it's those shoes.
Yes.
I would want to say, if I were Janice, you know what, Grandma? I want you to know that as a kid, you hurt me very deeply. And I want to move beyond. But I want you to know that you hurt me. It was hard to be hit by a shoe. It was hard to keep the secret. And I think about it every time I see you, and I don't want to do that anymore. You just took a sigh. What was?
The sigh is, Janice, I'm sorry that I hurt
Really?
you. Yes.
Not
I'm sorry that I
defensive.
hurt you. That's how I think
Wow.
I'd respond. I don't know that necessarily would.
You're a
that's
godly
always,
woman.
Well,
Because if I can just interrupt you, so you know what
Absolutely.
I was thinking is that if someone came to me and said, I want to forgive you for X, X, and X, I might say, well, I didn't do that, or that wasn't my experience. You misunderstood the whole thing. And to have someone come and say to
Yeah.
me, I forgive you, it seems really down-putting in
Yeah.
a sense. And I would guess that there are times when you can forgive without giving it language, but in your interactions with each other, that it just becomes apparent.
You know, it's interesting that you would say that, Barbara, because when I was role-playing here with you, Dilys, I couldn't say the word forget. That's why I said I want to move beyond. Because I did. I
feels a
felt
little
like
condescending or
to
something.
say I want to forgive you would feel, and I might have in that role play, but I thought about it as I was doing the role play, that would feel, just as you're saying, condescending.
It's also a time to get in some licks. To say, here's what you did to me, to remind them another time. Even though I think there are times when you should say to people, this is what I'm forgiving you for, this is what it meant to me. Sometimes you have to do that to move on. But I guess it would really depend on the spirit in which you did, and how well that person might take it.
and I think the sigh, for me, if I'm thinking of the grandmother sitting there, hearing this granddaughter come to her and say, you know, you hurt me. You really hurt me. And I think that for me was a sense of, wow, I did. Because I think sometimes we do things to people out of our own frustration, our own pain, our own hurt, and we've never stopped to think about what we did. And I think for me, just hearing you say it was a sense of, man, wow, that, you know, I did something to you. It wasn't the child that, you know, I come from a culture where you got spanked. I mean,
Exactly.
it was no ifs, ands. I come from a culture that spanks, you know, and we just say, okay, we understand that some people don't spank, but we do.
Do you use your shoes?
No, no. And the funny thing is, I remember early in our lives, my mom saying to my sister and I, no one is to ever put their hands in your face, ever. She says it's never okay. And she says, and they're not to hit you with things, you know. And I've had friends who we talk about spanking, and they're like, you never hit with your hand. You know, you might have a spoon, you know, a wooden spoon in the kitchen, and you might tap your child with. But one of my friends, a good friend of mine, says, your hand should be the place that love comes from. So if you are going to spank, don't use your hand.
Well, especially
you know,
on a face.
and definitely not in such a way that's going to hurt
But
someone.
just because Janice is hurt doesn't necessarily mean Grandma was wrong. You know what I'm saying?
To beat her with a shoe?
Well, I'm just.
And leave black and blues?
I'm just saying.
I'm a little reactive to this.
take away the shoes and black. I'm saying just because someone comes and says you hurt me, doesn't mean you're in the wrong.
Correct.
But it's interesting what happened to me when I saw you sigh. It affected me even in the role play. And I was thinking, you know, we're saying forgiveness isn't about forgive and forget. It's about forgiving and remembering differently.
Yes.
Because if you respond to me like that, wow, I'm going to remember this moment.
Yes.
What a great way to think
Yes.
about that.
Yeah.
Yes, I think Tibbetts is the one that says that's like reframing the situation from his book Forgive to Live. It's being able, it's the person who is going to extend the forgiveness is able to reframe the situation. So that would definitely reframe the way you look at it now
Sure.
when you see it.
You know, I used to teach at Walla Walla University, and we formed a forgiveness project where we actually did research. We wondered whether or not you can actually teach somebody to forgive, and we found that you can.
Okay.
And we had a number of people that we talked to, and we created a list of things that people felt they really couldn't get past. So we can look at our slide, and it'll show us that the individuals felt that they had all of these concerns. A lot of them were from the family abuse, marital problems, relationships, you know, who's going to get what inheritance, and then a few things from work or spiritual from the church, a number of different things. And if we notice that the effects of not being able to forgive are pretty significant: physical illness, emotional pain, avoidance, impaired family communication. So the family learns not to talk about these touchy things where, you know, remember grandma, she's not so nice. And so real difficulty in trusting others. So we found that it was very difficult to be able to forgive.
Oh, it runs deep. The pain of being hurt by someone or of hurting. I'll never forget when someone came to me and said, "You've hurt me deeply," and I'm like, you know, it hurts you to know that you hurt, and it's an instant mechanism to say, "I didn't mean to," you know, or hear my side of the story, but that's not what that person needs. You know, they need you, if you're the one that hurt them, to just want to hear more, and respond lovingly. Not to, at that moment, tell your story, unless, you know, phase 2 comes and then you can say, "Would you like to hear from my perspective?" But if that person says no, it's just not the time. But it's hard because you say, if they only knew my motive.
That's right.
Right.
You know, and sometimes we have to realize that forgiveness is not absolution.
Yes.
It's not saying it never happened, it didn't matter.
Yes.
It's not sometimes saying that we're going to go right back to what we were doing before.
That's right.
Because it might not have been safe to go back to that.
I think that's one of the things that is challenging for people to be able to understand that when there's been a hurt and there needs forgiveness to be extended, it's okay to forgive, and the relationship be different.
Yeah.
You know.
And it's okay. I was thinking about some of the issues with the priests, and I saw in the news at one point where they were trying to interview a man that had been abusive, and his comment was, "That was a long time ago." And I thought, now that's interesting for him.
Yes.
It was a long time ago.
But it's constant.
But it's
for the victim.
constant for the victim.
Yeah.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not, I think forgiveness doesn't mean you have to like the person after you forgive them. I mean, you think
Or
of the
that you have
crimes
to
that are
have a
committed, or
relationship.
that you have to be close to them. Sometimes it means that you're going to let go of the outrage that you feel, and you might give it to God, or you might say, "It's my will to forgive," or "Change my will to forgive, make me willing to forgive." And it's a process, it's not just an event. Like when we were kids, you know, my brother and I used to lay in our beds at night and yell across the hall at each other. Just before we went to sleep, "Will you forgive me for everything I ever did to you?" Yes. And then to be dead silence. And I would call back, "Will you forgive me for everything I ever did?" Yes.
I need
And
to call my sister.
until he said yes, you know, I thought, what if I die in my sleep? Oh dear. You know how kids are when they're at a certain
Right.
age, thinking about what forgiveness
Forgiveness.
means.
Well, you talk about kids, and a lot of people have these theological misunderstandings that if I don't forgive, will I go to hell or something? But you know, it takes time to forgive. And,
It does.
It does.
And I hope for people that that if there is something difficult that happens, they may not be able to forgive this week or next week or the next. And dying in that time doesn't mean they're not covered, you know.
Yes,
by the
and they're on the
grace.
trajectory. They're
That's
on
right.
the path.
That's right.
And they're asking God to enable them
It's
to
a
do that.
process. That's right.
Now, if you are unable to forgive, it can lead to you being sick.
It can lead to you being
It can
sick.
lead to sickness. I mean, you know, Dr. Tippett, who wrote the book Forgive to Live, talks about using forgiveness, teaching people how to forgive as a process to reduce their high blood pressure. You know, there are people who, because they're unforgiving, have made themselves sick. And they don't even realize that they're sick as a result of the anger that they're carrying from the pain of people who have hurt them. So it's really important to learn how to forgive and to extend forgiveness, if for nothing else, but for your own sanity and your health and well-being.
Oh, you see it happening on the freeway. I mean,
Yes.
maybe neither of you get upset at cars.
Certainly not. No.
But I find a car, you know, when a car does something that's just unbelievable, you know, you find yourself saying, how is that possible?
That's right.
You know, and you find your blood pressure rising and
As a matter of fact, to tag on to what you're both saying, Fred Luskin, who's at Stanford, has done extensive research on forgiveness, and he says that people who have a difficult time forgiving, more likely people who are wallowing in unforgiveness, he said they are much more likely to drop of sudden cardiac death.
oh yeah.
My.
So there's another physical reason for us to really think about this.
And a lot of spiritual reasons when you're carrying unforgiveness. You can't progress in your own relationships and growth. And
I remember
sits
giving
in
a
your
lesson one
mind.
time about forgiveness, and I just went through the Bible talking about
Yeah.
forgiveness, and I got home and sat on the couch, and it hit me right between the
That's
eyes,
right.
someone I couldn't forgive.
That's right.
Oh,
it
doesn't
hits
that
all
hurt?
of us.
That's
Oh,
right.
it hurt. It was
Oh,
terrible.
I remember dropping stones from off a bridge, and each stone represented something or someone that I was trying to forgive. And I came to that last stone, and I couldn't drop it. I just sat there with my hand over the bridge, just wanting to drop it. And I remember turning to Gordon and saying, he said, "What's wrong?" I said, "I can't drop it." And he reached out and actually helped open my hand so that I could
Oh, my.
drop the stone. It's a very powerful moment that sometimes we need community,
Absolutely.
you know, to help us do the thing we want to do. Because it's hard. It's
What a
very
powerful
difficult.
story.
Absolutely.
Very difficult. We have some call-in questions. Actually, they're email questions. It starts out difficult. Are you ready?
Yes.
Oh, boy.
I should put this
Get
one
my
last.
tissues out.
This one's hard. My husband had an affair. He wants to get back together, and I want that as well. But the pain is so deep that I don't know if I will ever be able to live with him again. Is this an issue with forgiveness or something else?
Wow. You know, the Bible says to bring forth meat of repentance. And I think that we are, as Christians, we're so anxious about whether or not we're forgiving that we forgive, but it's really not forgiving. We say the words prematurely, and everything just gets under the rug. And we say, well, we're godly people, we're going to forgive, and therefore we can just move on as though nothing happened, which would be my fear for this woman. And we need to know about accountability.
Absolutely.
And maybe the wound is so deep they can't. But the beginning is to start thinking together about accountability and checks and balances.
And I would also say that I would encourage them both to go and sit with a counselor.
Absolutely.
You know, because forgiveness is not an instantaneous thing. I mean, as you said, you may say it prematurely. If she's still grieving the wrong that was done, then it takes some time. And both of them should be willing to say, okay, it may take you some time to reframe this, to rethink this, to actually extend to me that grace that I'm asking for, because it's grace that you're asking for me to love you again, for me to not look at you and every time I look at you, think of you with someone else. I mean, that's very real, you know, and she has a right to be able to voice that, and it's good to do it with maybe a third party, helping them through those stages.
Well, and Barbara, you said something that's very powerful that I'm sure no one wants to hear, but is very real, and that is sometimes the wound is so deep you can't. Not you can't forgive, but you can't go back, or you can't resume a relationship, or you can't spend time with a certain person. Sometimes it's just that deep.
Wow.
Shall I move on to the next one?
Yes.
It gets even worse. It gets harder.
Oh boy. I thought that was the hard.
2, a man in the church sexually abused my daughter. I don't want to forgive him. I don't feel like I can forgive him. What should I do?
I guess I would wonder what that person's notion of forgiveness is, because it sounds like, well, you know what I'm thinking of is a statement that I heard that failing to forgive is like giving your enemy poison. Or no,
Giving
this is,
yourself,
I'm doing, drinking the poison and then waiting for your enemy to die. There you go. I knew it was
There it
something
is.
around poison. But I wonder what her notion of forgiveness would be.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I want to support her anger.
Oh, yes.
You know, I've often thought if I were to find out that something like this had happened to my nephews, I can't even take it in. I would be on the porch of somebody. You know, that anger is real, and it can't and shouldn't be swept under the rug. But given that, you can't live like that. You can't live with that water pistol in your hand.
Well, you know, I think a lot of churches are so concerned about, and rightfully so, about living the gospel and having policies in place that will extend the love of God to people, that they're not as good about extending the accountability.
Yes.
And now we see some churches that are creating policies about what do we do if there is a sexual offender in our midst? How can we minister to their spiritual needs while protecting others? And this is a little bit tricky.
Well, and this person is true. I don't want to forgive him. Of course you don't. I don't feel like I can. Of course you can't. And that's where the power of God is, has to be really real in the community. And people step. It's like holding that stone. You can't let it go. You need the help of community and people who love you.
And it's also a process of time.
Yes.
Because as you see a child suffer on account of what one person did, and you see them not just suffer, and this is something abusers forget, that it doesn't hurt them, like you were saying earlier, it doesn't just hurt them years ago.
Yeah.
It hurts them for a long time.
Daily.
And as a
Daily.
parent, the outrage would be tremendous.
Yeah.
Yes. And that doesn't mean, and again, if what their understanding of forgiveness is important, it doesn't mean that you forget. And it doesn't mean that you don't have consequences. You know, that there aren't going to be consequences for the action, you know, in that community. There are consequences.
That's
and we will love you and be there to support you, but there are consequences, you know.
Sure. That is a hard one.
I'm going to put these last two together.
Okay.
I forgive a lot of people for the things they do to me on a daily basis. People refer to me as a forgiving person. However, I don't hear people feeling bad for their actions. Eventually, I will not want to forgive them. Then what? The Bible says that I'm supposed to forgive 70 times 7. That's a lot. What keeps me from hating the people in the end when I forgive them so much?
Wow. You know, it strikes me that's not I don't think that's entirely a forgiveness issue. I think that's a boundary issue, too.
Yes, say more.
Well, I'm thinking that if I allow people to act toward me in a certain way without giving voice to my frustration or setting a limit to say, you know, I know that you're human and you're failing, but you're not to treat me this way.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is not acceptable.
You end
And there are
up hating.
consequences for
That's
this
right.
behavior. And I think when we are able to set some of those limits or speak back and have a voice with some of the individuals that do continually offend, then I think the picture changes and we don't maintain anger as our only source of power. Because sometimes I think we get angry because we don't have any other recourse, really.
And I'd like to just give a practical tip here. If anyone is feeling like they're doing all the forgiving, it's because they probably are. And that if you don't see a balance between you and others, that you are forgiving and they are forgiving back, it smacks of a boundary issue. The second thing is if you find yourself forgiving too much, you may be. You may be just chalking too much up.
You may be just pushing it under the rug.
Pushing it under the rug, yeah.
Wow.
I
Well,
think
that's
what
a
struck
tough
me
one.
again was the statement you made about drinking the poison and waiting for somebody else to die. This sense,
So good.
again, of, well, they hurt me, I forgive. They hurt me, I forgive. I'm tired of forgiving. You know, you're the one that's carrying all of that around you. You're the one that's holding on to it, and they don't even necessarily know that you're tired of being trampled on.
Oh, and how many times I've seen that in marital relationships, especially I hear it from women. They have given and given and given until they are given out. And now they hate. You know, so you go for so long on this forgiving attitude. They call it forgiving attitude. And then you get to that place where you just, you know, not only do you not
They're
want
done.
to forgive, you want out. And you've lost the love that you, any hint of the love that you ever had.
So that's a key point, that for the inability to forgive erodes love. It erodes trust, because you're holding on to the past, and what you sow is what you reap. If all the thing you can remember is all the ways that you've been hurt, then you won't even see the ways that you've been loved, or even pick up on anything good that might have been in the relationship, if your focus is just on that particular issue and those particular things.
The first part of this says, the Bible says I'm supposed to forgive 70 times 7. That's a lot. I think that's cute. It is a lot.
Yeah.
Life is made up of a lot of forgiving, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think Jesus giving that number, if you're going to spend the time to sit down and count how many times you've forgiven someone, that's
Well, Peter thought
exhausting.
7 was a lot.
Was a lot.
7?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
she's like, no.
Yeah.
70 times that.
7.
But I think it also refers to having a forgiving spirit.
Yes.
Because Jesus certainly did.
Yes.
And he even prayed that the ones who crucified him would be
Absolutely.
forgiven.
Absolutely.
And so I think it is about having a forgiving spirit, but also we've
But
got to
he held
have a
people to
balance.
task. Yeah,
Well,
he
sure.
held people to task for what they were doing to
Sure.
him too.
So there are no actions out there that do not have a reaction. We've heard that statement. And then there's nothing that happens in a vacuum. We're all affected by it. You know, today we've been talking about forgiveness, and I think I liked that quote that we started with, the definition, you know, giving up the right to hurt someone for hurting you. And we know that if you're unable to forgive others, most times we end up carrying that baggage, that pain, that hurt, and we end up getting sick. And we just want to invite you to really accept the forgiveness that you've received and get help. Talk to a friend or a counselor or a confidant, someone who can help you to really deal with the pain from the hurt that you've received. We're thankful that Jesus is our true example of forgiveness, and that He's extended that to us. That's all the time we have for this life. Thank you for being with us today.